Sorry, I hate to speak from a sitting position, so I'm going to stand. We have to get real about something, and I'll give you it from a British perspective and the perspective of somebody from a South Asian background. My parents are from India. It is not racist to limit legal migration into your countries, okay? Let's dismiss as risible on the outset the argument that we hear from the other side, from the get-go. Here's the problem we have. You have people, from 1948 in the United Kingdom, we had people who were emigrating into the United Kingdom who had no interest in the United Kingdom, who had no stake in the United Kingdom, who didn't want to consider themselves British citizens, who didn't want to be part of British civil society, who didn't even want to speak the language, let alone be an economic boon to our country. They just didn't want to do it. What they wanted was to have the things that many Britons had gone to their deaths for. And you have the same toxic environment and the same toxic discussion taking place here in the United States. Your conversation, for some reason, ridiculously, revolves mostly around illegal immigration. But let me tell you this, we just removed ourselves, and I hope you clap for this, from the European Union. Yeah. And one of the major reasons we removed ourselves from the European Union was the economic basis of the fact that there were people, economic migrants, coming into the United Kingdom who were replacing the workers that we had that didn't want to do the jobs because the prices were being pushed down, the wages were being compressed and depressed by mass migration. And guess what? It wasn't black people, it wasn't brown people. Europe is predominantly white people. And so therefore, this argument that somehow Brexit is racist, that somehow Brexit is about the colour of one's skin, is an absolute non sequitur. We have to get to the point where we realise that bringing down legal immigration is just as important as tackling the problems that are created by illegal immigration. People are relying on us. Paul Gosar is an incredible man, an incredibly brave man who's fought against some of the most heinous campaigns against him for daring to say some things that we consider or should consider are the most basic economic facets of running an economy and running a country. Right? And Corey Stewart's exactly the same way. You have to get past just the illegal immigration stuff. The legal immigration has to be brought down as well, and I think America, as the country that everyone else in the world looks to, should be one of the first to do it. God knows everyone else is around the world. It's time to turn it back. Thank you.
Next question, and for this one, Raheem, you can go ahead and consider yourself a resident of Washington, D.C. What impact has demographic change caused by immigration had on the politics of your respective states? And again, we'll start with Corey.
Okay. Well, you know, the left, but it's not just the left. Let's make that very, very clear. It's the establishment Republicans who are perhaps our biggest obstacle in this regard. You know, I didn't win against Tim Kaine, but I was able to achieve more votes than any other Virginia statewide candidate you know, for all the prior elections, except for Tim Kaine. Except for Tim Kaine. Now, there's a reason for that. I can talk about that more. But this idea that when I ran on this platform of limiting, especially cracking down on illegal immigration and taking a look at, you know, making our immigration system more, you know, more meritocratic and having a more an immigration system that was for the U.S. national interests as opposed to the interests of the individuals that are coming into the United States. That was very, very popular in Virginia. We got a lot of people, and when you bring this issue up among African Americans, among, yes, Hispanics and other minorities, they agree with us on this. This is not a vote loser, folks. From a political perspective, we need to stick to this issue instead of being pushed around by establishment Republicans who say, if we go down this path, We're going to be called racists, and we're going to lose elections. It's a bunch of bullocks, to borrow a British word. So what has happened is very, very clear. Bloomberg, by the way, spent $100 million in Virginia to establish a machine, which he did. They registered hundreds and hundreds of thousands of voters, many of them who were not in the country legally, let alone being citizens. They simply register them. You don't have to prove that you're a United States citizen in Virginia in order to register to vote. They showed up. The Democrats held their hands. They brought them into these polls. People didn't even recognize who these folks were, and they turned elections. They not only turned my election in 2018, they turned all the elections last year in 2019, and for the next several years, it's going to be very, very difficult to win a statewide election in Virginia because of it. So yes, there's a very big direct impact on running for office as a Republican in Virginia and around the country because the Democrats have very, I hate to even give them credit for it, but they've been very deft at registering people who are not eligible to vote and turning elections because of it.
Well, my state has had a real problem with legal immigration, and that is from the state next to us, from California. You know, they want all the benefits of Arizona, but then they want to bring their politics there. And so what you've seen is this mitigation from a really red district to areas now that we'd never consider them blue, but they're blue the last election. That's critical to start looking at the migration of people within this country and the values that they bring with them. You know, there was a billboard on I-40 outside of Arizona, and it was pointed to the California side that said, listen, Californians are welcome. Bring your guns, leave your politics behind. And then there was another billboard behind it that said, listen, if you didn't like the first billboard, turn around and go home. But once again, it's up to us to have that discussion. I think that the Hispanic vote is there for the taking. They're much, much more like us. They're family-oriented. They have Christian values. They're hard workers. So they're ready to be there. And in my district, there's about 20% of my district is actually Hispanic, and we win them hands down because we engage. So these demographics are going to change. Being a Sun Belt state where people from Wisconsin and Michigan and New York all want to come down to have the nice lifestyle, it changes our dynamics. That's why you see our delegation as a 4-5 now, where it should have been a 7-2. Red. We're behind the curve. We also have independent redistricting, which also skews those numbers. So our demographics has changed dramatically. And we're a big portal in regards to the drug trade and human smuggling. So it's a huge differential into our state.
I think Paul's point is very well taken, but I will cite that very recently we saw a study, and I apologise for not having it to hand. I was actually just dragged in here from the bar next door. Otherwise I would have had my printouts ready. There was a study that showed recently that Hispanics are also much more likely to vote in favour of socialistic policies. But we have to ask ourselves why. To get to the answer, you have to look at a lot of what Univision and Telemundo give about 10 to 15 times more coverage to immigration issues that affect Hispanics in this country than they have given over the last 3 years to the economic boom that has had more Hispanic people in work in the United States than ever before. And yes, you could turn around and say, well, they could just change the channel. A lot of natural-born Americans could change the channel from CNN or MSNBC as well. But we often know that isn't the case. People gravitate towards things that they are naturally more inclined to, naturally more comfortable with. So a lot of the burden of why this is the case rests with the perverse media out there that is not just there to service a particular community or there to service in terms of a capitalistic way of dealing with the media. They're there to propagandize, and we know that. And so we have to look at what's going on with these people and what maybe we're doing wrong. Are we not pushing them enough? Are we not sanctioning them enough? And are we not telling them that this is unacceptable to us enough? But I won't consider myself a resident of Washington, D.C. for the purpose of answering this question. I would consider myself still a Londoner, right? Which is much like saying I'm a New Yorker. So I really don't have much in common with the rest of the United Kingdom, as much as New Yorkers have with the rest of the United States of America. However, I will tell you this, I'm not a Londoner in this sense. You know, we have Sadiq Khan in London. Can we get a boo, please? Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to be please clap next. We have Sadiq Khan, but we've also had another mayor of a neighbourhood in London called Tower Hamlets in the east of London. The mayor of that neighbourhood was called Lutfur Rahman. And what Lutfur Rahman did is he figured out a way to take £1 billion, that's probably about a $1.4 billion budget a year, and siphon funds off to local mosques, to local imams, to local Bangladeshi and Pakistani community centres in return for what? That activists from those places would go and stand outside polling stations and harangue and harass people in those neighbourhoods, telling them how to vote on election day. By the way, it's illegal in the United Kingdom. And by the way, I've stood outside those polling stations with cameras, and by the way, the police, when I call them, do absolutely nothing about it. It is a criminal offence and they do nothing about it. The fact of the matter is there is a massive demographic problem, and the massive demographic problem hasn't even actually come to the United States as much as it's come to European neighbourhoods. In 2017, I travelled around Europe and I wrote a book called No-Go Zones, How Sharia Law is Coming to a Neighbourhood Near You. And it is. It's happening in Falls Church in Virginia, it's happening in Hamtramck in Michigan, it's happening all over the place, and nobody is paying particular attention to it. And one of the downsides, I'll conclude on this point, just think about it, one of the downsides of being in power, of having MAGA, of having Trump, is that actually sometimes we look to this and we go, isn't it great? We've got such a great president, we've got such great cabinet ministers, we've got such great representatives out there. But sometimes we forget there are still problems, there are still deep-seated underlying problems that we're not addressing. And there are a few that do it, but we have to have a unity. We have to have a number of people who are out there, people like you guys in this room who are out there, who are bringing this message, whether we're in power or not. We complained a lot about this before Trump was elected. We're not complaining about it enough. You think it's forgotten? Listen, you might not have an interest in Sharia law. Sharia law has an interest in you, believe me.
All right, so we have time for one more question. I think this is a good segue, and I also think this is a very pertinent question because I think we're starting to see particularly private sector unions coming back towards the Republican Party because of immigration. So how should the Republican Party shift on immigration to become the party of the American worker? Corey?
You know, we're lucky we have a president who's been able to unite the Republican Party largely, at least through November, and he's going to win re-election, we think. What happens after that is the big question mark. Because what President Trump did, together with all of us, is we wrested power of the Republican Party, over the Republican Party, away from the elites, away from the establishment, and we brought it in to the American people. And when we did it, the president was very adroit at bringing in the working class Americans in key states, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, who were pretty much cast adrift by the Democratic Party. And the question is going to be, now what the establishment is going to try to do after this election, they're going to try to nominate somebody, one of them, who's going to try to keep the Republican coalition, the Trump coalition, but they're not going to want to give the new, working class, working men and women who Trump brought into the party, they're not going to want to go their way on the issues that they care about. Immigration's one of them. Values is another. There's a whole international trade, it's another one. They're going to try to bring the Republican Party back to the establishment ways, right? Only looking at business interests, ignoring all the social issues, ignoring and actually promoting illegal immigration. And that's going to be the big fight. So I'm not prepared to lead the big battle right now against, the establishment, but I got to tell you this one thing, folks. After the president wins re-election and Representative Gosar and other like-minded Republicans are there, that's when the big battle starts. And we have to keep that in mind, because I'll tell you something right now. The big sin, the original sin, as Bannon once said, of the Trump administration was bringing in Reince Priebus, who put the gatekeepers at the door and made it almost impossible, if you're a Trump loyalist, to make it into the Trump administration. That's got to be fixed right after the November elections.
Well, from my standpoint is I look at this president going to win re-election. I think the biggest key that we have is that we got to recapture the House and keep the Senate. That is a key component, because when you look at the hole that AOC has over the Speaker right now, we cannot win that debate. So we have to take the House back. Those are the dynamics. But number two is something we haven't considered yet is the legal challenges that now are starting to go our way. Look at the affirmation this week that allowed the president to say that you can't be admitted because you could be a drain on public resources. We would have never expected that before. So look at the composition. Ninth Circuit being a big problem. Now all of a sudden we got to change. What took them so long? We had 9 openings when Trump took office. If they were smart, they would have jammed 9 conservative judges on that panel, and then had the conversation to divide the Ninth Circuit, because it's got 3 times the backlog of cases as any other court case to be divided, and start having the discussion about the 12th. Now what you've done is, I'm going to be in the 12th, I'd happily take 4 liberal judges into the 12th. That gives me the advantage point of having 2 very conservative judgeships again. Look what caused you most of your problems with the immigration issues, from the travel bans all the way across the board. So play smarter, not harder. Number 2, another case that's coming through is a case challenging birthright citizenship. Interesting who it is. All of a sudden now, the IRS did us a favor. They sent out notices to people around the world who are here legally as students with their parents. They were born here and then went home. They got a tax bill saying, you're a citizen, you owe this amount of money. Well, they're challenging that, saying, no, I'm not. That's not what the birthright citizenship actually states. So that's going to percolate up. Last but not least, you're right, Corey. Behind closed doors, it is the Republicans aiding this discussion, facilitating. Think about this. Why do the Democrats aren't pushing this big time? Why have they occupied every state having a border, a state having it all Democrats? I'm the only Republican in Arizona who has a point, 1 point on the border. The rest of it is controlled by Democrats. That is crucially evident here, having that discussion. But once again, I think that we need to look at this president, be ready to rock and roll, and when we get that majority, facilitate that. I think the discussion that you'll see coming out of particularly folks like the Freedom Caucus and others, we're going to be talking about process. Because we're going to have to rein in the speaker, whoever that speaker may be. They answer to us. The speaker has become much too powerful. We work for the people. The people, we work for the people. The speaker works for us. And that starts with the delegation at the chairman level. So when we're on a committee, the committee should be choosing that chairman. And then we facilitate the speaker to fit that position. And then we have to get back to process. Good process, good builds good policy, builds good politics. And we have to have this conversation. I think truly we have an opportunity unlike any other time in our history and recent memory. We can correct these changes. Look at what he's done with trade to limit the application from Mexico, from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. Look at this. He's done it in spite of Congress. In spite of Congress. Look what we did to him with his minor children. We can't even arrest somebody that's a known criminal as long as they're in possession of a minor child. So I think the opportunity here to have this great discussion with the American people, with the American worker, they get it now. They absolutely get it. And when you expose programs like the OPT program for what it does against the American worker, and you see it playing out in real time, people come all over the place. I just had a discussion last night. Remember I told you about the 70,000 doctors? I was talking to a doctor last night. They want to bring somebody in less qualified for lower money to be subservient to a monolithic insurance company that dictates everything. That's treating symptoms, not diagnosing the true problem.
Hit me with the question again.
How should the Republican Party shift on immigration to become the party of the American worker?
Elect more Paul Gosars and Corey Stewarts and fewer Mitch McConnells and Lindsey Grahams. You know, a lot of people in the room will be aware of the phrase personnel is policy, right? And what that means, and that who you hire means what you get done. And of course, I think we all know that there have been problems in this administration along those lines. The name Lieutenant Colonel Vindman comes to mind, but there are hundreds of others that should have never been there in the first instance. But personnel as policy doesn't just apply to the positions that are occupied in government, to the positions that are occupied in the legislature, to the court systems and so on and so forth. It also applies to what type of people we put up on stage at conferences like this. It applies to who's accredited and who's not accredited. It raised the question, why is Molly Jong Fast on stage across the road? Why is Gavin McInnes kicked out? Why isn't Laura Loomer on that stage? Why do we have this situation now where we're paying tens of thousands of dollars to come to a conference that doesn't represent the interest of the people that elected a president in 2016? Why is that happening? Who are the people that are allowing that to happen, and how do you replace them? That's what I want to know.
We will make America great again.